As I was getting ready today, I realized a short disclaimer might be in order for this sermon. I realized I have a pronoun problem. I refuse to use the pronouns he, she, or it in reference to God. Therefore, I end up using the word God probably more than necessary in the sermon. It's a pronoun problem. I'm working on it. Would you raise your hand if you were born into Unitarian Universalism or it was part of your childhood? Wow, even fewer than I realized. Thank you for confirming what most of us knew or thought. The majority of Unitarian Universalist adults are converts from other faith traditions. More recently, large portions of new UUs come from homes with no active religious affiliation. That means most of you made some pretty serious twists and turns in your faith life. Even after arriving in a UU community, we continue to evolve in our beliefs in ways big and small. Our understanding of the sacred changes with time. A handful of people have already signed up for our class called Owning Your Religious Past that starts, I think, next month. I'm excited about it. One of the exercises in that class shows up in a few different adult religious education curricula. It's writing your spiritual autobiography, tracking where you've been on your spiritual journey. That includes different religious traditions, moments of inspiration, or life events that changed your understanding of the world and your place in it. No one could give a few sentence answer to that question, but the longer answer, the real changes in your thought and feeling, is what is really interesting. Today we're talking about faith as a journey of discovery. While there's value in being rooted in tradition, the ancient wisdom and rituals that have stood the test of time, our faith is dynamic, living, changing, growing, hopefully. When we change, it can be helpful to me to be aware of whether we're moving toward something that's drawing us forward or moving away from something that no longer fits. Or you might be moving with another person or community, companioning one another on a journey. As you move toward, away from, or with, it might be some combination, but it helps to identify which is happening. Let me give you a few examples. The conversion story of George de Benneville is helpful because it's a window into the thoughts of early Universalists, and it tells a story of moving toward a more loving faith. You may be familiar with de Benneville as the namesake of our UU camp up in the mountains. It's beautiful. It's also the name of one of the most important founders of Universalism in America. After facing persecution for his Universalist belief in a handful of European countries, George de Benneville came to America in 1741. He was the first person we know of to preach Universalism here. As a young child, he was drawn to his Universalist faith through a personal spiritual experience. As a young person, he had been deeply tormented by his visions of himself burning in hell. This is literally as a child. He was convinced that his sins were too many and too great to be forgiven. It's sad to think of kids carrying that type of burden, but it was standard Christianity in those days. They painted a picture of a terrifying, wrathful God. One day, another vision came to young George de Benneville. It was a vision of Jesus directly interceding to save him. In that moment, he knew that he was saved. More importantly, with regard to Universalism, this vision convinced him that most other people must be saved too. He thought, If a wretched sinner like myself, as a child, would be saved, then surely everybody else must be forgiven as well. It wasn't so much that people thought that they were too good to be condemned, but that God was too loving to do that transformed de Benneville's faith. I don't imagine the exact content of that experience resonates with many of you, but I can easily imagine that at some point in your life, you might have been drawn toward a different perspective because you knew in your bones that it was more loving or more logical or more true for yourself. Being drawn forward by inspiration of what could be is a beautiful type of transformation. Just as many have been compelled to shift their orientation because they were repelled. There was some idea or practice that you needed to move away from. Often when we do new member orientation classes, I ask people to very briefly introduce the story of how they landed at Tapestry. A few years ago, a woman's story was so vivid, it sticks with me. I can't remember who it was. You might actually be in the room today. But she told the story of sitting in her Christian congregation. It was a progressive community. She felt connected there. But one Sunday, she found herself in the service saying, along with everyone else, the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed or some other statement of faith. And like a light switch, she realized, I don't believe this. Why am I saying this if I don't believe this? And that moment pushed her to a different path in her spiritual life. Her experience of change is less dramatic than many of the experiences of moving away from a belief system. I'm reminded of the many, many queer people who, to this day, have no interest in religious community because the faith of their family of origin was so traumatizing. Many left family and friends in their journey of change. They moved away from what they could no longer fit with. The last type of change is perhaps the one that takes the most work, but may be the most fruitful. It's moving with. I've had the opportunity to watch a couple of different congregations make this type of transformation, moving with each other. One was Community of Hope. They were created as a United Methodist outreach to people living with AIDS in the 1990s, the early 90s actually, maybe the late 80s. Eventually, the minister of that congregation was brought up on charges in the denomination for performing same-sex marriages. After soul searching, she decided to transfer her credentials to another denomination. And over the course of years, the congregation chose also to change their affiliation from the United Methodist Church to the more liberal Disciples of Christ tradition. It's a much bigger deal than it might sound like. In Protestant America, many people have deep, deep senses of loyalty to their denomination. And for a congregation, there are huge legal and financial commitments that are part of that reality. But they moved forward, and in that shift, their identity took on a sense of being companions to one another. Companions on a journey to be a more radically loving community in an environment that was pretty darn hateful. They embraced the identity of companions traveling alongside one another. There's another way that I've seen that play out here at Tapestry some. Several of our families land here from different faith backgrounds. I mean, between the two. Christian and Jewish, or atheist and Christian, or Muslim and Christian. They participate in Unitarian Universalist community initially because it's a common denominator, a place where the diversity of their beliefs is welcome. But I hope and I believe that in that process, once they are here walking on a path together in the same religious community, they're drawn toward more fully understanding each other and leaning into their common UU values. In a couple of months, the worship committee will invite a few of those families of mixed religious heritage to share that experience with the congregation. I'm looking forward to hearing more about their traveling together on the journey. Now, so far I've talked about change as a personal journey, moving toward or away from or with. We might also think of change as a reflection of how we see time. There are a few different ways of looking at time. It's not something we think about a lot because it's part of our culture, and we don't really see what our own culture is doing, but I promise there are a couple other ways of looking at it. In many indigenous cultures, and in Europe before the Renaissance, time was experienced mostly as a great circle. It was marked by repetition. The sunrise and sunsets, sunrises and sunsets, and the seasons change in a clear, predictable loop. In those times and places, technological progress was slower than one might recognize in a single lifetime. We remember time before the internet, before cell phones, a time before so much progress. But I wonder, how much different would it be to be in a culture where technology remained largely the same for your entire lifetime, and the lifetimes of the people before you and the people coming after you? That circular view of time tends to be grounded in place. What happened here is still happening here. The past didn't go anywhere. What happened to the land and the people, everything that has shaped is still here. But the sense of time that you and I are more familiar with is linear and theoretically progressing. Some people anchor this sense of time in the Renaissance and the modern scientific revolution and technology. Other people point to that sense of time in the sort of Christian framework of Jesus being a benchmark in human history, that there was a time before and a time after, and we're moving forward. Now, we don't have time to unpack all of that today, but that Christian framework combined with technology shapes our sense of time. We see it as a unique story, progressing with a beginning and maybe an ending. And given enough time and technology, all problems can be solved. But there's also a third way of looking at it that I want to invite us into as we consider our own spiritual paths. It's the notion of time or progress that looks more like a spiral or a corkscrew. We will repeatedly face the same challenges and joys. The cyclical notion of time, even as we learn and grow. The progressive notion of time. Put them together and you get a spiral. We never completely leave the past behind. For a very concrete example, there's no getting rid of your family of origin or childhood. You can transform the way you think about it, hopefully, but the past doesn't go away. What happens is we get further from the moment and we gain more and more perspective and grow. The opposite is also possible. We might become embittered and spiral backwards. The past keeps echoing back, but with new opportunities to learn and to do better. Time happens as a corkscrew. As a side note, this is also the pattern by which we move through literal space. Most of us were taught that the solar system moved like a flat disk with circles going around it. In reality, the sun is moving really fast, and all of the planets trail behind it in a big corkscrew. And I learned this week that our sun is actually orbiting the galaxy every 230 million years, but not in a direct circle. It's also moving in a corkscrew around the galaxy. Dave Weber can tell you more about that after the service. But I think it's worth noting that in space, both the Earth and Sun are moving forward in a corkscrew pattern. Okay, coming back to the ground, back to today. The hymn that we sang a little bit earlier, Bring Many Names, was a favorite of many seminary students back in the day. I think we enjoyed it because every day in class our heads were swimming with different depictions of the sacred. I love the hymn because it talks about all the different facets of the way the sacred shows up in our lives. On top of confronting some really outdated gender norms with strong Mother God and warm Father God, it also plays with other traditional notions of who or what God is. It goes beyond the simple, all-powerful, eternal to suggest that the sacred changes. If you can see beyond the word God for just a moment, I hope you can appreciate how powerful that lyric is. Young, growing God, eager still to know, willing to be changed by all you've started. Quick to be delighted, singing as you go, hail and hosanna, young, growing God. Like all the verses, this one is a nod to the divinity of the youngest members of our community. It's also a powerful statement about the nature of the divine. It changes with us. You may have heard that many of our forebears, particularly the founding fathers of this country, were deists. In their embrace of the scientific revolution, they tried to reconcile a God that could fit with their understanding of mathematics and physics and astronomy and natural laws. So they came to believe in a creator who made a beautiful, complex world with all its natural laws, wound it up like a great clock, and then stepped aside to let things run their course. Tick-tock, tick-tock, round and round we go, playing out the plan that was set for us from the very beginning. That model does have the advantage of taking scientific laws seriously. But do we really feel inspired or connected to a God who, in today's language, would set it and forget it? For many people, a sense of personal relationship with the sacred is important. For them, it's important for the sacred to have a capacity to care what is going on. If God is unchanging, unmoved, then is there any caring happening? It's hard to wrap my head around caring about God that is ambivalent about life. Yours or mine, or ambivalent about humanity. Now, I know that sense of a personal God that thinks and feels like a human is a stretch for most UUs. Even if the sacred doesn't engage with the world in those very human terms, there's still room for it to be a dynamic force. I believe that's one of the reasons many of us see the sacred in nature, because of the dynamism there. We appreciate the rain on parched earth because it's a relief from the hot sun. We're inspired and humbled by the cycle of life that we're part of. Nature, and particularly life, are all about change, not the tick-tock of predictable clocks. Life is about fighting for survival, about agency and chance and choosing love and charting a course. In that dynamic landscape, sparks of the sacred call creation forward to opportunities for greater beauty. All of this waxing poetic is to say that I have a strong sense that the sacred changes. It is transformative and transformed along with us. Why would we ever want a faith, then, that is stuck in one spot, or one book, or one way of seeing the world? Life is all about change. We are called to a faith that also changes, a faith that lives. Being drawn forward or pushed outside of our comfort zone or joining loved ones on a journey of discovery can be scary, but it's also part of being alive. Welcome to the journey. Amen.